In the countryside and towns of a population which comprises half the developing world, the chant of children learning the Koran floats in the morning air. Its melody, its rhythm, its words convey the wisdom of Islam. Quranic schools exist everywhere, from the corners of mosques to the shade of trees. From dawn to noon, and sometimes even until dusk, children as young as 3 years old partake in a form of learning that has existed almost unchanged for a millennium. Quranic schooling is one of the few remaining indigenous forms of education in the world, and yet surprisingly little is known about how children actually learn in Quranic schools. These children and their teacher, or faqih, are chanting part of the Koran in a mountain village school in Morocco. In Indonesia, Yemen, Senegal, and Morocco, we sought to learn about these schools and how the differing histories and traditions of these countries affected the development of Quranic schooling. The roots of this traditional way of learning stem from the nature of the first written versions of the early Koran. Because the original writing did not indicate pronunciation and punctuation, the Koran was transmitted orally from person to person in order to preserve this body of religious wisdom. In fact, for Muslims, Koran means recitation. As Western education becomes increasingly widespread, attempts to modernize Quranic schools are also increasing. The traditional school is primarily devoted to the accurate recitation and memorization of the Koran. Students begin their education by learning the Arabic alphabet. They chant the letters and words in a rhythmic fashion, just as young children do in many Western schools. Students use a variety of mnemonic devices such as rocking, marking with a stick, intonation, and rhythm to memorize the Quranic verses or surahs. They learn to recite by imitating their teacher or faqih.
أحسن ما أنزل إليكم من ربكم الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتعملوا وما كسب سيصلى نارا ذات لهب وامرأته حمالة الحطب
This teacher is introducing his student to writing. The student traces over the letters and words written on a thin wooden board, or luha, by a more advanced student or teacher. This board, narrowed at one end, is rubbed over with a clay wash on which the student writes with a reed pen. The ink is traditionally prepared from charred horns or wool and water. In this way, the child learns to copy Quranic verses onto the board and to memorize them. Then he moves on to another surah. The advanced student makes his way through the entire Koran in this manner, word by word and verse by verse. Indonesia is the largest Muslim nation in the world. Over 200 local languages and dialects are spoken here, as well as the national language, Bahasa Indonesia. Few people actually speak Arabic, although the 120 million Muslims represent over 90% of the population. Traditional forms of religious education may be found in many rural communities such as this one in north-central Java. It is a village noted for the quality of its religious education. There are a dozen schools here. People earn their living through agriculture or in small trading and cottage industries. Village life, however, is dominated by the Pazantrans. They are Islamic religious schools which draw students, both male and female, from neighboring communities. They are run by Qiyais, or holy men. Pazantrans, like this residential school with its dormitory, are said to be descended from the earlier tradition of Hindu-Buddhist monastery schools. Students typically attend these schools for 8 years. The Pazantrans are economically self-sustaining, since students are able to work in the surrounding fields and in small commercial activities. Some Pazantrans are associated with national religious foundations. They have also set up health clinics, savings associations, and modern sanitation programs. Each week, hundreds of village people gather for a sermon, which sometimes lasts up to 4 or 5 hours. It may include a mixture of religious teaching as well as social and political organizing. The Indonesian Kiai is a central figure in this village. Like his grandfather and father before him, a boy becomes a Kiai after many long years of study. Until recently, it was even thought that the Kiai's knowledge of the sacred Arabic had magical properties. The Kiai was very powerful. He was often called upon to advise in personal and family matters, as well as those of a more political nature. In addition to being community leaders, Kiais like this one are sometimes distinguished scholars. Students meet regularly in his house to engage in another form of religious schooling, the Witan, the study circle, where more advanced students gather so the Kiai may assess their progress in Quranic memorization. The power of the Kiai, however, is changing. A half-century ago, the literacy rate was less than 10%. The power of the written word and that of the Kiai was tremendous. Now, with a literacy rate of over 50%, written words inspire less awe. Education no longer seems like an induction into a mysterious elite. In the 1950s, some of the Pazantrans modernized their curriculum to include general subjects, such as Indonesian language, history, and the sciences. These are taught in Indonesian using more modern methods, such as age-graded curricula. Religious subjects are taught in Arabic, however, by the old pedagogies, emphasizing strict discipline, group recitation, chanting, and individual instruction. Pazantrans are competing with the public schools by expanding their involvement in the community itself. In Indonesia, this extensive adaptation is an indicator of the real vitality of the traditional school in contemporary society. Islam came to Senegal in the 11th century through trade and occasional raiding from North Africa. Now, after 9 centuries, more than 90% of the population is Muslim. The Senegalese are native speakers of Wolof and other West African languages. They learn French as a second language. Few actually speak Arabic. Under charismatic leaders, Islamic brotherhoods became a major anti-colonial force, linking agriculture, political power, and Islamic education. This mosque is built at the tomb of one of these leaders, Amadou Bamba, who was head of the Murids Brotherhood. Amadou Bamba helped to convert the economy from the slave trade to peanut growing in the late 19th century. He is still a widely popular figure whose picture is found everywhere from the marketplace to taxicabs. Quranic schooling in Senegal was at the hub of the power network of the Brotherhoods. In the rural Quranic schools, students were usually boys between 5 and 15 years old. They were expected to provide long hours of work in peanut cultivation as a donation to the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood used the Quranic school as a way of gaining access to increased converts, land, and political power. However, with the advent of crop diversification and the growth of migration to urban areas, the Quranic school population has declined. Senegalese Islamic education in the last few decades has changed greatly. Many of these changes are evident in the modernized Islamic schools. This teacher has promoted a modernist philosophy of education which allows this Islamic school to compete successfully with the public school system. He is conducting a weekly recitation class in the modern meeting hall of the Islamic community. After 2 or 3 years of traditional rote learning and recitation, his students are taught to read and write Arabic. Islam was introduced to Yemen even before the Prophet Muhammad died in 632 AD. In fact, after Saudi Arabia, Yemen is the country most closely associated with the founding of Islam. Unlike Senegal and Indonesia, where secular schools have existed alongside Quranic schools for centuries, Quranic schooling in Yemen was the only form of education. Yemen has been a crossroads for Muslims who traverse the Red Sea from Egypt and Sudan to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. Occasionally, these religious pilgrims and Islamic teachers would stop and live in towns such as this one called Beit al-Faqih, which means literally the house of the teacher. Quranic schools held classes exclusively for boys in small rooms next to the local mosque, under tents, and sometimes even in caves. Only a few students became scholars and teachers. In a country with such a low level of literacy, these religious scholars had high social status as well as considerable legal and political power. Following the revolution in 1952, Yemen began to allow girls into the public school system, and more recently even into the Quranic schools. In a country where the worlds of men and women have been so separate, the entry of girls into the exclusive religious world of the men is an event of revolutionary proportions.
محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم يا كريم اللهم صل وبلغ.
Traditional Quranic schools in Yemen may be found in cities as well as in remote rural areas. This 60-year-old faqih teaches the Quran to a dozen young boys on a mountaintop overlooking his village. He alternately engages his class in group and individual recitation to determine who has or has not successfully mastered the day's lesson. It was surprising to find how few literacy skills these children had actually learned. Later, it was discovered that the faqih himself was virtually illiterate. He had memorized the whole Quran, he knew the proper style of recitation, and he could correctly copy certain words, but he could not actually read in Arabic.
وهو عليم هيا ومن له حقا علينا ومثل المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات لله وإلى روح الرحمة وإلى روح النبي سيدنا محمد.
Basic literacy was not traditionally a central focus in Yemen's Quranic schools. In this Quranic school, with a more modern teacher, however, most of the children will learn to read and write, since comprehension is stressed as well as memorization. This school exemplifies the kind of change that is taking place in Yemen. As we have noted earlier, both boys and girls go to Quranic schools. Literacy rates are beginning to rise dramatically, and there seems to be a strong undercurrent of pressure to modernize the curriculum. In Morocco, Quranic schooling encompasses aspects of both tradition and change. 90% of all children attend Quranic schools, and girls' attendance is almost the same as boys. Until the 20th century, Quranic schools were almost the only type of formal education available. Since 1968, the Moroccan government has supported Quranic schooling. Until very recently, the government also required that all children have at least 2 years of Quranic school before entering the modern public school. Traditional schools like this one in a small rural village located in the Middle Atlas Mountains cannot compete effectively with the public schools. Consequently, the Moroccan Quranic school is fast becoming a 2-year religious preschool. It has expanded its curriculum to include the teaching of arithmetic as well as reading and writing. Children spend the morning in this school learning the Arabic alphabet and simple words, and following the fiqh in chanting the verses of the Quran. As in Yemen, the presence of girls in this classroom represents a radical change in a country where women are still veiled and schooling has been the province of men. Other evidence of change in this school is the use of the blackboard in addition to the luha, and the use of small slates and chalk replacing the old-time wooden boards still used in Senegal and Yemen. For many of the children in this room, the 2 or 3 years they spend in this school will be the only formal religious schooling they will receive. On the other hand, some children do not attend modern public school and will seek further training in madrasas or middle-level Quranic schools associated with a mosque as shown here. Satisfactory performance could allow them to become a professional faqih. The faqih is supported by a small salary provided by the community, and he may be given a free classroom attached to the local mosque. In some instances, however, the faqih must pay rent for a classroom and live on the small income derived from student tuition. This faqih now runs a bathhouse and a small store since he can no longer make a proper living as a Quranic teacher. However, he still chants the Quran for religious occasions. The general economic situation for Moroccan faqihs is not promising. Older faqihs have trouble adjusting to the requirements of change, while younger ones are not able to enlist the community support once obtained by their predecessors. Around the world, modern public school teachers often decry the old teaching methods. Some educators claim that the effects of Quranic schooling on children's thinking and reasoning is detrimental because of the strict emphasis on memorization. Parents, on the other hand, insist that their children be taught the traditional values and claim that strict discipline teaches proper respect for authority. They also feel that the moral teaching of religious schooling is an essential part of every child's upbringing. In countries as diverse as Indonesia, Senegal, Yemen, and Morocco, Quranic schooling is still clearly central to the education of Muslims. What is less clear is how this traditional schooling is changing and what its effects are on young children. In Indonesia, Muslims have been successful in providing a complete religious education for their children, from preschool to the university. In Yemen and Senegal, Muslims are attempting to modernize the Quranic school curriculum to compete with public government schools. In Morocco, the Quranic schools have become specialized institutions for children before they go to the public schools. The persistence of Quranic schooling is due to its unique place in the social and religious fabric of Islamic societies. Quranic education is not monolithic. Memorization of text is common to most schools, but the role of the teacher differs in important ways. Of one thing we can be certain: Quranic schooling will, in one form or another, be a significant factor in the lives of Muslim children for many decades to come.